You tried to be good. You gave people the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself, maybe they didn't mean it like that. Maybe they'll realize. Maybe they'll fix it. You stayed patient. You stayed calm. You kept forgiving because you thought that's what strong people do. And what did they do with that? They took more. Because here's the truth. Nobody wants to admit. Most people don't respect kindness. They study it. They test it. And if you don't draw a line, they don't stop. They escalate. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He said mercy is not this holy, unlimited thing. Mercy has limits. And once those limits are crossed, cruelty is not evil. Cruelty is survival. Now pause right there, because a lot of people hear the word cruelty and shut down. They think of rage, revenge, chaos. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about necessary cruelty. Necessary cruelty is not you emotionally exploding. It's not you trying to hurt someone just to make them feel what you felt. Necessary cruelty is precise. It's intentional. It's clean. It's the moment you stop asking, stop warning, stop hoping, and you enforce consequences. Listen carefully. The people who suffer the most in life are not the weakest. They are often the kindest, because kindness assumes the other person is like you, that they value respect, that they feel guilty for stepping on you, that they'll correct themselves because they don't want to lose you. That is not how the world works. Machiavelli's view was simple. The world doesn't run on empathy. It runs on pressure. In that kind of world, kindness by itself isn't just ineffective, it's invisible. So what do you do when kindness stops working? You change form. You stop asking for basic respect. You stop repeating yourself. You stop saying, "Hey, that hurt me." You stop giving them rope because they're not using that rope to climb. They're using it to pull tighter around your throat. And you begin something colder. It's not screaming. It's not drama. It's not chaos. It's calculated. This is the law of necessary cruelty. Here's how it works. Machiavelli said, "A ruler who is too merciful allows disorder to spread. But a ruler who punishes quickly when it's needed prevents bigger suffering." That's huge. Cruelty, when you use it correctly, isn't about harm. It's about control. It keeps things from rotting. It resets the terms of the relationship. It tells the room, no, this doesn't happen with me. Because let's be honest, in every friend group, every team, every family, there's always one moment that sets the tone. One moment where everyone finds out what they can get away with. If someone disrespects you in front of other people and you just swallow it, you didn't keep the peace. You just announced, there are no consequences here. You taught the group something dangerous. I'm safe to humiliate. You can push me and nothing will happen. But if you respond with controlled force, not yelling, not crying, not lashing out, but with a cold shift in temperature, people remember. You don't have to be liked. You have to be understood. That's the difference. This is the first real rule of necessary cruelty. Don't explain your change. Enforce it. Watch how power shifts in real life. The person who always forgives eventually becomes the joke. The good listener eventually becomes background noise. The leader who never corrects anything eventually loses the room. People do not respect those who refuse to confront. They respect those who are capable of confrontation and choose when to use it. Not every insult deserves a reaction, but the ones that do, those need to be answered so decisively that nobody even thinks about doing it again. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said, if you must harm someone, do it in such a way that you don't have to fear their revenge. In other words, don't play with consequences. Don't deliver weak punishment. Don't act halfway. If you're going to act, act fully, cleanly, permanently. Because once you decide that kindness is no longer the strategy, you're not switching moods. You're not trying to negotiate with them emotionally. You're becoming the consequence, and that is a different identity. Here's how you start that shift. It begins with silence, then distance, then strategy. You don't announce, "I'm done with you." You don't give them the dramatic speech they're secretly hoping for. You go still. You let them wonder if you even noticed. You let them start feeling that something is wrong before they even know what's happening. By the time they figure it out, it's already too late for them to repair it. That's not pettiness. That's leverage. Cruelty, real cruelty, has rules. It's not emotional revenge. It's not chaos. It's not you spiraling. It's controlled power. It's you saying, "I gave you chances. I was patient. I stayed calm. You misread that as weakness. Now I'll teach you what I was actually capable of." Because here's another rule. Cruelty that comes from insecurity is weak. It looks desperate. It looks emotional. People don't respect that. But cruelty that comes from restraint, from watching, from waiting, from documenting every red flag, from seeing that this person is who they are, that cruelty hits different. That kind of cruelty marks people. It burns a rule into their memory. Don't touch this one. This is what most people get wrong. They think being nice is morally superior. They think giving infinite chances makes them enlightened. But in Machiavelli's world, and in the real world, unlimited mercy is not seen as compassion. It's seen as hesitation. Let me make this part very clear. There are moments when mercy becomes dangerous. It starts small. A comment that was just a joke. A promise they forgot. A little public embarrassment that you try to laugh off. You tell yourself, "I'll be the bigger person. I'll let it go." But Machiavelli would ask you, at what cost? Because here's how people read it. The first time you let it go, they think, "Okay, I can push here." The second time, they think, "There are no consequences." The third time, they don't even think. They just take. This is why Machiavelli said, "It is much safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." He's not saying, be cruel all the time. He's saying this: once your kindness begins to damage your authority, kindness is no longer kindness. It's liability, especially in groups. In groups, everything is observed. Who can be interrupted? Who gets talked over? Who gets mocked without pushback? Who's safe to challenge? Who never bites back? And the second they start to believe that you won't punish disrespect, they stop seeing your kindness as a choice. They start seeing it as your only option. That moment, that exact moment, is when you act. Not loudly, not emotionally, not with a scene. You act with finality. Because very often the cruelest move and the cleanest move is not yelling. It's removal. Not, "I'm mad at you." Not, "We need to talk." Just, access closed. You quietly stop giving them what they were benefiting from. Your time, your attention, your warmth, your loyalty, your presence in certain rooms, your name attached to theirs. You cut it off like a power supply. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to argue about it. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to defend yourself to them or to anyone watching. Machiavelli said, "Make people fear you in a way that does not breed hatred." Translation: you don't have to be brutal. You just have to be undeniable. You let your actions say, "This is what happens when you cross someone who gave you every chance." That's necessary cruelty. Sometimes cruelty doesn't come from one big betrayal. It grows slowly from 1,000 tiny cuts. The interruptions, the dismissive laughs, the constant subtle challenges when you speak, the tone they use when they think no one's watching, the moments that don't look like disrespect, but feel like it. You tell yourself, "They don't mean it. I'll rise above. But every time you do, they learn something. They learn that your silence is safe. They learn that you won't act. They learn that your peace has no teeth. That's where Machiavelli's brilliance hits hardest. He said, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone can see you, but few can touch you." What does that mean? It means perception matters more than truth. You might be strong on the inside, but if you look tolerant of humiliation, people treat you as weak. The world doesn't reward what you feel. It rewards what you project. So when your silence starts to look like permission, it's time to change the atmosphere. You don't have to argue. You don't have to announce anything. You shift. You go colder. You stop explaining. You become brief. You answer with stillness instead of emotion. You hold eye contact longer than you should. They expect warmth. You give them nothing. They expect reassurance. You give them space. And when that happens, they panic. Because cruelty doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes it looks like indifference. That's the second form of necessary cruelty. Psychological withdrawal. You make the space between you and them colder until they start to feel the distance like a punishment. They start wondering, did I do something wrong? Why does it feel different? Why are they so quiet? That's the art of it. You don't destroy them. You make them destroy themselves with their own thoughts. That's cruelty without chaos. It's discipline disguised as calm. Machiavelli called this a ruler's precision. He said, "Injuries must be inflicted all at once." Why? Because long, drawn-out punishment creates hatred. Swift, silent correction creates fear. That's the difference between revenge and strategy. Revenge wants them to hurt. Strategy wants them to remember. And when you do it right, when your cruelty is sudden, controlled, and final, you never have to repeat it. People don't learn from your kindness. They learn from consequences. The same people who laughed at your patience will start whispering about your silence. The same people who thought you'd never change will suddenly become cautious, polite, even respectful, because they felt the shift. They'll never admit it, but they'll sense that version of you, the one that forgave, the one that over-explained, the one that tried to understand doesn't exist anymore. That's the goal. When Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved," he didn't mean you should become a monster. He meant that power built on respect lasts longer than power built on affection, because affection fades, but fear, the memory of what you're capable of, stays. So when kindness fails, you don't scream. You don't chase closure. You don't post cryptic messages. You don't demand they understand. You go silent. You go still. You go missing in plain sight. You reply slower. You stop initiating. You look through them instead of at them. You become unreadable. And when they finally ask, "Is something wrong?" you say the coldest sentence Machiavelli ever taught: "No, everything's fine." That line kills because it gives them nothing. It leaves them drowning in uncertainty. And uncertainty is the most haunting punishment of all. See, when you refuse to explain, you trap them inside their own imagination. They replay everything they said, every moment, every joke, every word they used against you. They start questioning which part broke you, which act finally crossed the line. That's psychological leverage. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said cruelty must be useful. The goal is not to make them bleed, it's to make them think. So ask yourself this: what lesson do you want them to remember? If they disrespected you publicly, your withdrawal should be equally public. If they betrayed you privately, your distance should echo privately through your absence, your coldness, your energy. Don't ghost them, that's too easy. Don't block them, that's too final. Let them see you, but without the warmth they used to rely on. Let them feel how empty the room feels without your attention. That's how cruelty teaches, not with pain, but with contrast. Because the cruelest punishment isn't humiliation, it's indifference. It's when you stop caring so completely that your silence becomes louder than any argument. You don't raise your voice, you just remove your energy. And that absence, that's what they'll feel. They'll start talking. They'll try to flip the story. They'll play the victim. They'll say you changed. And Machiavelli would tell you, let them. Because the moment they start explaining your behavior to others, they're already admitting how much it affected them. You stay calm. You say nothing. Because in that quiet, their own noise exposes them. Every story they tell reveals more guilt. Every attempt to make you look bad makes you look stronger. That's the third law of necessary cruelty. Silence exposes your enemies faster than words ever could. The more they talk, the more the truth leaks out through their desperation. And when people ask you what happened, you give them the simplest, coldest line. Nothing really. I just moved differently. That sentence ends the story. It tells the world you didn't fall apart, you evolved. You didn't fight, you ascended. You didn't lose control, you took it back. This is where cruelty separates itself from revenge. Revenge wants an audience. Cruelty doesn't need one. Revenge tries to win a battle. Cruelty ends the war. Because cruelty isn't emotional. It's psychological. It's strategic. It teaches without explaining. It punishes without touch. You don't destroy people. You destroy the dynamic that allowed them to harm you. You shift the balance of power so deeply that they can never see you the same way again. Machiavelli said, if you must harm someone, do it in such a way that you need not fear their revenge. In modern terms, that means don't give them proof, don't give them closure, don't give them a chance to rebuild their confidence around you. Hit once, hit clean, hit quietly, and then stillness. No checking if they miss you, no asking if they understand, no looking back. Because true cruelty doesn't chase validation. It leaves them to wrestle with their own reflection. It's not about hurting them. It's about reminding yourself that you are not someone to be toyed with. That is necessary cruelty. The art of saying nothing while teaching everything. The discipline of withholding warmth until it's earned again, if ever. The power of silence so controlled it makes the whole room colder. That's what separates the kind who get used from the kind who get respected. Cruelty done right doesn't look like punishment. It looks like transformation. You don't raise your voice. You don't break things. You don't type long paragraphs trying to prove your worth. You shift. You become something they never expected. Calm, unreachable, untouchable. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said, injuries must be inflicted all at once. The longer you drag it out, the weaker it looks. If you deliver it swiftly, with precision, with silence, it becomes unforgettable. See, repeated forgiveness doesn't make you noble. It makes you predictable. People change only when the cost of their behavior is sharp enough to make them afraid to repeat it. That's why one act of necessary cruelty, one moment of absolute clarity, can save you from a lifetime of humiliation. You don't need to keep teaching the same lesson. You just need to deliver it once so cleanly that it burns into memory. Because here's what they'll remember. Not your lecture, not your emotions, not your pain. But the moment they realize they lost something they didn't think they could lose. That loss will teach them more than any speech. When you remove your presence, your loyalty, your attention, your warmth, they finally feel the vacuum they created. The silence where you used to be becomes their mirror. They see the part of themselves that caused it. That's Machiavelli's genius. Cruelty is not chaos. It's psychology. It says, I don't enjoy this. I just understand the game better than you do. Because this is a game of perception, of boundaries, of leverage. And in this game, kindness without consequence is an invitation to be used. Cruelty, when used right, is not about breaking someone. It's about breaking a pattern. The biggest mistake people make when they finally decide to stop being kind is that they swing too far. They confuse necessary cruelty with emotional revenge. They want the other person to feel it, to cry, to beg, to see what they did wrong. That's not power. That's dependence. Machiavelli would call that foolish, because once you make your cruelty about your emotions, you give them control again. He said, the injuries that must be inflicted should be done all at once. The benefits, little by little. Why? Because emotional cruelty backfires. It exposes that you still care. It shows that you're still in the game emotionally, and that means they still own part of you. Real cruelty is artful. It's performance. It's the ability to punish without losing your composure. It's the power to act without explanation, to cut ties without theater, to deliver silence instead of speeches. You don't need to show pain. You need to show control. That's the Machiavellian way. Deliver cruelty with grace. So how do you do that in the real world? You start with small, almost invisible shifts. You reply slower. You stop initiating. Your tone changes, not mean, just cold. Your eyes stop softening. You're there, but you're gone. And when they finally notice and ask what's wrong, you say, no, everything's fine. That line, that stillness haunts people more than anger ever could. Because when there's no confrontation, there's no closure. And without closure, the mind loops endlessly, trying to find meaning. That's your leverage. They start to replay every word, every interaction, searching for the moment they lost you. They start feeling guilt that you never assigned to them. They begin to self-destruct, not because you punished them, but because you stopped giving them your clarity. Cruelty that works doesn't scream. It lets their own thoughts do the work. You also make sure the lesson fits the offense. If someone disrespected you publicly, your withdrawal should be visible. If they betrayed you emotionally, your absence should be emotional. They should feel it in the silence of their messages, in the empty space you leave behind. But don't block them. Don't ghost them. That gives them closure. Instead, let them see the shadow of what used to be, the way your laughter no longer includes them, the way your eyes no longer soften when they walk in. Let them sit in that coldness. The cruelest punishment isn't screaming or revenge. It's never making them feel chosen again. That's Machiavellian cruelty, subtle, strategic, final. And when they try to twist the story, when they go around saying you're the problem, Machiavelli gives you the next move. Silence. Let them speak. Let them defend their version. Let them perform their guilt in public. Because here's the thing, when you punish someone and stay calm, they expose themselves. They talk more. They reveal more. They prove your point without you lifting a finger. Your silence becomes your evidence. Their noise becomes their confession. So when people ask what happened, you say the line that ends all gossip. Nothing really. I just moved differently. That's it. No drama, no defense, no emotion. Because true cruelty isn't about being loud. It's about being unforgettable. This is the fourth law of necessary cruelty. The one who explains less controls more. When you withdraw without ranting, you keep your mystique. When you stay calm while they spiral, you own the narrative. When you leave without closure, you make sure the story ends on your terms. Machiavelli didn't believe in unnecessary enemies. He believed in memorable consequences. You don't want people to hate you. You want them to remember that losing you is expensive. Because once someone realizes that disrespect cost them access to your peace, your attention, your energy, they think twice before trying again. That's why cruelty, done correctly, doesn't ruin your reputation. It rebuilds it. It turns you from the person who is taken for granted into the person who's finally respected. The world doesn't fear loud people. It fears the quiet ones who can disappear without a word. Because if you can leave this calmly, imagine what you'd do if truly provoked. That's real fear. That's real respect. Cruelty, when done right, doesn't end your story. It begins a new chapter, one where you don't explain, don't chase, and don't return. Still, silent, untouchable. That's the art of necessary cruelty. There's one thing people always underestimate about cruelty: the aftermath. The aftermath is where most people lose their power. They deliver the punishment, the silence, the distance, the cutoff, and then they crumble. They second guess. They check if the person noticed. They stalk their reactions. They wonder if they went too far. That's not cruelty. That's a performance. Machiavelli would tell you, real cruelty doesn't seek confirmation. It ends with stillness, no remorse, no checking, no reopening the wound just to see if they're still bleeding. Cruelty must be followed by composure. That's what gives it weight. Because if you punish someone and then hesitate, the punishment evaporates. They'll sense that weakness immediately. They'll test you again. And this time your silence won't scare them. It'll invite them back. So here's what Machiavelli taught. After necessary cruelty, you don't heal the old bond. You build something entirely new. You rebuild without softening. You become colder, but not bitter. You speak less, but observe more. You stop reacting to every pull, every test, every emotional hook, because they will test you. They'll come back just to see if the old version of you still exists. They'll crack a joke. They'll send a message. They'll try to make you smile again. And if you give in, if you return to who you were, they'll return to who they were. That's why Machiavelli warned, if you let someone believe you've returned to who you were, they will return to who they were. Cruelty has to create a permanent version of you, one they can't recognize anymore. So when you rebuild, you don't go back to being nice. You become mysterious. You become unpredictable. You become the person who learned the lesson and never repeats the test. That's how you become unforgettable. Because cruelty that ends in clarity transforms you. It hardens you into something they can't manipulate again. You never apologize for holding standards. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your boundaries. This is one of the hardest lessons of power. Once you explain your decisions, you invite negotiation, and negotiation dilutes authority. If someone disrespected you and you walked away, that's the statement. If you cut them off, that's the closure. No essay, no debate, no emotional clarity required. The moment you start explaining your cruelty, it stops being cruelty and becomes justification. Let people wonder. Let them whisper that you've changed. Let them invent their own theories. You owe them nothing. You owe the world even less. Because the truth is this: people rarely want understanding. They want access. And every explanation you give opens the door for them to re-enter. That's why silence is sacred. Silence keeps your evolution sealed. Machiavelli said, "He who causes another to become powerful ruins himself." In modern terms, that means the moment you give someone the power to make you doubt yourself, you lose everything you built. If someone had the power to make you kind and then used it against you, you have every right to evolve into someone they no longer benefit from. That's not cruelty, that's justice. And when that shift happens, when they feel that your energy no longer bends for them, you don't need to say anything. They'll sense it. Everyone will. That's the aura of finality. Machiavellian cruelty isn't about domination. It's about completion. It's about showing that a chapter has ended, permanently, and there's no negotiation about reopening it. The cruelest thing you can do to someone who expected your endless forgiveness is to move on without flinching. No hate, no anger, just indifference. Because nothing disarms the manipulator faster than the realization that they no longer affect you. Finality does two things. It restores your self-respect, and it creates mystique. You regain power because you acted on what you always knew, that the situation was beneath you. And you gain mystique because you vanished without explaining why. Now, you live rent-free in their uncertainty. That's how power is built, not by controlling others, but by showing them they no longer control you. Machiavelli's idea of recovery was never about healing in the emotional sense. He believed in transformation, in making sure the same wound never opens again. If your kindness was mistaken for weakness, your only real revenge is never giving them the chance to make that mistake twice. Most people relapse because they crave closure. They want the other person to admit they were wrong. They want to prove they weren't crazy. But true power doesn't need validation. True power doesn't revisit the battlefield once it's won. It builds a fortress over the silence and stands guard. Quiet, calm, unbothered. Because cruelty done right doesn't have to be repeated. It echoes. It lingers. It keeps teaching long after the words have stopped. When you finally master necessary cruelty, you understand something rare. You don't need to destroy people to be powerful. You just need to withdraw what they took for granted. Your absence becomes their punishment. Your peace becomes their pain. And every day they live without the version of you they once had. That's the consequence. Because you didn't break them. You let them meet themselves without you. That's the cruelest truth of all. The world doesn't respect people who always forgive. It respects those who act once, cleanly, and never return. That's what it means to be untouchable. There's a moment quiet, sharp, almost invisible, when someone realizes they've lost you. Not your words, not your presence, but the version of you that still cared enough to forgive them. It doesn't happen with a scene. There's no fight, no explosion, no speech. Just stillness. And in that stillness, they finally see the truth. You are gone, not physically maybe, but emotionally, spiritually gone. That's what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about necessary cruelty. It isn't about inflicting pain for pleasure. It's about transformation. About drawing a clean line between who you were and who you'll never be again. Cruelty, in its purest form, is rebirth. It's the moment the part of you that kept forgiving dies, and the version that enforces boundaries is born. The moment you stop negotiating with your own dignity. The moment you stop waiting for closure and become it. Machiavelli understood something most people never will. The world doesn't obey empathy. It obeys pressure. People don't respond to your goodness. They respond to what they stand to lose. That's why kindness alone will always fail in a world built on advantage. Because those who worship peace too long end up being conquered by those who understand war. So when kindness fails, as it inevitably will, you must evolve. Not into rage, but into precision. Not into vengeance, but into command. That's what cruelty truly is. Command. When you go silent, they expect anger. When you stay calm, they expect weakness. When you give them nothing, they start to lose their balance. Because silence forces reflection, and reflection is the most merciless mirror of all. You don't have to say, "You hurt me." You don't have to prove they were wrong. You just remove yourself and let the echo of your absence do the teaching. Because when there's no explanation, the human mind becomes addicted to guessing. What did I do? When did it change? Can I fix this? They'll replay every word, every look, every memory, searching for the line they crossed. And the more they think, the deeper they sink. That's Machiavellian cruelty. The kind that doesn't bleed, it lingers. You don't punish them with chaos. You punish them with quietness so absolute, it eats them alive. And here's the most important part. You never tell them. You never explain the silence. You never give them the dignity of clarity. Because closure is mercy, and mercy is what they already abused. Machiavelli's cruelty is psychological precision. It's making your absence feel heavier than your presence ever did. He said, "If you must harm someone, do it in such a way that you need not fear their revenge." In modern terms, that means never give them a map back to you. You vanish without a trace they can follow. That's not cruelty, that's control. And the beauty of it is this. When you withdraw in silence, they destroy themselves trying to understand it. At first, they'll be angry. They'll tell themselves you're cold, heartless, dramatic. Then the anger turns into confusion. Then confusion becomes obsession. They'll scroll through old messages, remember your tone, your kindness, your laughter. They'll realize the gravity you brought to every room, the peace, the warmth, the certainty. And when that gravity disappears, everything else feels hollow. That's when cruelty becomes effective, when your absence makes the world tilt. You didn't need to scream. You didn't need revenge. You just needed to leave completely. Because in the Machiavellian sense, cruelty isn't destruction, it's education. It's showing people without a word what happens when they mistake gentleness for weakness. And the lesson is brutal. When you misuse kindness, you lose access. Permanently. Cruelty is the closure they earned. It's the invisible punishment that doesn't wound the body, but the ego. It leaves them haunted by the idea that someone else now gets the version of you they wasted. That's the fear Machiavelli understood best. The fear of replacement. The fear that your attention, your loyalty, your warmth, everything they took for granted now belongs to someone else. That fear breaks them more than any confrontation could, because it turns their own imagination into the weapon. You don't need to confirm it. You don't need to deny it. You just let them wonder, because ambiguity is the most painful kind of cruelty. It doesn't give them answers. It gives them questions they can't escape. You don't say, "I'm done." You just act done. You stop showing up. You stop explaining. You stop caring in visible ways. And that gap, that void where you used to be, becomes unbearable. Soon, they start talking. They try to rewrite the story. They tell others you changed, that you think you're better now. Let them, because Machiavelli would tell you, the more they speak, the more they reveal. When someone tries to destroy your reputation after you've gone silent, they only prove your impact. They show the world that you mattered, that they're still fighting a war you've already walked away from. Your stillness exposes their noise. And when others ask what happened, you don't give details. You don't share your side. You simply say the most Machiavellian sentence ever spoken. "Nothing really. I just moved differently." That line says everything. It says you're not bitter. It says you're not broken. It says you're untouchable. Because cruelty, when done right, doesn't end with drama. It ends with composure. You don't flinch. You don't check if they noticed. You don't return to the battlefield to see if they've healed. Because power isn't proven by reaction. It's proven by absence. And absence, silent, final, absolute, is the sharpest weapon you'll ever wield. Machiavelli never told you to be cruel for cruelty's sake. He told you to be respected. And if respect only arrives after you've drawn blood, so be it. The world doesn't reward the endlessly kind. It rewards those who can pivot from mercy to precision. Because people don't change from your compassion. They change from your consequences. And those consequences must hurt more than their behavior ever rewarded them. So when kindness fails, don't explain. Don't announce your withdrawal. Don't warn them. Do what Machiavelli would do. Cut clean. Stay cold. Disappear completely. Let them say you've changed. Let them whisper that you've become colder. Let them call you ruthless. Because they're right. You have changed. You are colder. You are ruthless. Not out of hatred, but out of necessity. You gave them every chance to meet your kindness with respect. They answered with arrogance. So you answered with silence. And that silence, that impenetrable, disciplined silence, becomes your proof that you survived. It's what separates the weak from the wise, the reactive from the strategic, the emotional from the untouchable. You didn't destroy them. You destroyed the version of you that tolerated them. You didn't burn bridges. You built walls. Walls that protect your peace. Walls that filter who gets access. Walls that remind everyone watching, kindness is a privilege, not a default. That's the Machiavellian victory, not loud, not emotional, but clean. A victory that doesn't demand acknowledgement because its power is self-evident. They'll feel it when you walk away. They'll feel it when your name stops showing up. They'll feel it when the warmth they once counted on never returns. That's the moment they'll understand the law of necessary cruelty, the rule you learned the hard way. Kindness was the warning. Cruelty was the answer. And silence is the proof. So let the world whisper. Let them call you cold, detached, heartless. Let them wonder what changed. But never tell them. Because power isn't about being understood. It's about being remembered. And those who felt your silence, the ones who once mistook your mercy for weakness, will never forget it. That's how you win without rage. That's how you become respected without noise. That's how you stop being the victim of your own patience. Necessary cruelty isn't about ending others. It's about ending the version of yourself that begged to be seen. And when that version dies, something unshakable is born. Still, calm, unreachable. You become the storm they didn't see coming, and the silence that never leaves their mind. That is the final form of power, the Machiavellian kind. In the end, necessary cruelty isn't darkness, it's balance. It's the final evolution of kindness when it's no longer safe to be kind. You don't become cold to hurt others. You become cold to protect yourself. Machiavelli never taught hatred, he taught clarity. The moment you understand that peace without boundaries is slavery, you stop apologizing for drawing blood when it's needed. You stop explaining your silence. You stop seeking to be understood. Because power isn't found in being liked. It's found in being untouchable. So when kindness fails, don't mourn the warmth you lost. Honor it, bury it, and walk forward carrying only the calm, sharp certainty that no one will ever mistake your mercy for weakness again. That is the quiet revenge. That is the rebirth. That is the law of necessary cruelty.